"I'm his muse," she announced, shattering the pristine silence of my gallery opening. Cassandra stood there, her portfolio clutched to her chest like a shield, staring directly at me while my husband Daniel froze mid-conversation with the art critic from the Times. What she didn't realize was that by midnight, both their careers would be in ruins, and my revenge, served not cold, but with the precise timing of a master curator, would be complete. Conversation stuttered to a halt around us. The champagne glasses paused mid-air. My gallery, the culmination of 15 years of work in the cutthroat New York art scene, suddenly felt like a stage, and we were the unwilling performers in a tragedy I had orchestrated down to the last brushstroke. I smiled at her. This 26-year-old prodigy my 45-year-old husband had discovered 6 months ago. "Welcome to Visionary," I said, my voice carrying across the now hushed room. "I'm so glad you could join us for the unveiling." Daniel's eyes met mine, panic flickering across his face. He knew me too well, knew that my calm in the face of chaos always signaled a storm brewing beneath the surface. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." I'm Eliza Kincaid, owner of Visionary Gallery in Chelsea, Manhattan. For 15 years, I've built my reputation on discovering authentic talent, on seeing the truth beneath the artifice. Ironic, then, that I missed the deception happening in my own home, in my own marriage, or at least that's what Daniel thought. "Eliza," Daniel finally found his voice, setting down his champagne with a trembling hand. "I can explain." "No need," I replied, my voice carrying that same professional warmth I'd perfected for nervous artists and hesitant collectors. "Cassandra's work speaks for itself, doesn't it? Why don't you join me for the unveiling? After all, you've both played such integral roles in tonight's exhibition." Confusion crossed Cassandra's perfect face. She'd clearly expected tears, accusations, perhaps even a scene, not this invitation to center stage. Daniel knew better, though. I could see it. In the way his eyes darted around the room, seeking an exit strategy that didn't exist. "Ladies and gentlemen," I addressed the crowd of New York's art elite, collectors with pockets deeper than the Hudson, critics whose words could make or break careers overnight. "Tonight's exhibition is special, not just because it marks Visionary's 15th anniversary, but because it tells a story about authenticity, about truth and deception in art, and in life." I gestured toward the large installation covered in black silk at the center of the main gallery wall. This centerpiece was a last-minute addition, inspired by recent revelations. Daniel stepped forward, his hand gripping my elbow. "Eliza, what are you doing?" he whispered, his voice strained with barely contained panic. I gently removed his hand. "Curating," I whispered back, before addressing the crowd again. "Art is about truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable. For 15 years, I've built Visionary on that principle." The room was completely silent now, the typical gallery murmurs extinguished by the tension thickening the air. I moved toward the draped centerpiece, my heels clicking decisively on the polished concrete floor. "As many of you know, my husband, Daniel, has been representing an exciting new talent," I continued, gesturing toward Cassandra, who stood frozen near the entrance, uncertainty replacing her earlier bravado. Cassandra Vale's expressionist portraits have taken the downtown scene by storm. Her raw emotion, her authenticity, has captivated collectors and critics alike. I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the room. Marcel Chen from Art Forum was already recording discreetly on his phone. Good. I wanted witnesses. "Authenticity in art is everything," I said, reaching for the edge of the black silk. "Without it, we're just trading in beautiful lies." With one smooth motion, I pulled the silk away, revealing not one canvas, but a grid of them, 20 identical pieces, each seemingly a Cassandra Vale original, with her distinctive brushwork and color palette. But amid them, like a revelation, hung photos and documents, evidence I'd spent 6 months collecting. A gasp rippled through the crowd as understanding dawned. The paintings were forgeries, perfect replicas of Cassandra's style, but created by a master forger whose signed confession was now on display for all to see. Beside them hung emails between Daniel and the forger, bank transfers, and most damning of all, the original works by an unknown Vietnamese artist whose style Cassandra had stolen entirely. "What I'm exhibiting tonight is the anatomy of fraud," I announced, as flashbulbs began to pop around the room. How a gallery owner and his protege built a career on stolen work, artificial scarcity, and the manufactured backstory of a young artist's unique vision. Cassandra's portfolio slipped from her fingers, pages of stolen concepts scattering across the floor. "You can't prove anything," she stammered, but her eyes told a different story as they darted frantically around the room. Daniel lunged toward the display. "This is slander," he hissed, reaching for the documented evidence of his betrayal, both professional and personal. "I wouldn't," I said quietly, nodding toward the security guards who had moved to block his access. "Those are copies anyway. The originals are with my lawyer, the FBI's art crime team, and the major auction houses. By morning, both your reputations will be radioactive in the art world." The room had erupted in chaos now, critics furiously taking notes, collectors checking their phones to see if they owned any of the fraudulent works, gallery owners whispering frantically among themselves about the implications. I turned to face them both, lowering my voice so only they could hear. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice? I've been authenticating art for 20 years. Did you think your betrayal of my gallery, my reputation, our marriage, would go unchallenged?" "You've destroyed everything," Daniel said, his face ashen. "No," I corrected him. "You did that the moment you decided to build a fraudulent career for your lover using my gallery's reputation as collateral." As security escorted them both out, Daniel shouting about lawsuits, Cassandra in tears, I turned back to the stunned audience with the professional smile I'd perfected over years of gallery openings. "Now, shall we view the authentic works I've actually curated for tonight? I promise they're much more interesting than forgeries. And they're actually for sale." I hadn't planned for my marriage to end with an art fraud exposé at my own gallery opening. But then again, I hadn't planned for my husband to betray everything we'd built together either. The signs had been there for months. Daniel's sudden interest in discovering new artists without my input, the late nights at the downtown studio he'd rented, the growing distance between us that I'd initially attributed to the pressures of our expanding gallery business. When the first Cassandra veil painting appeared in our satellite gallery 3 months ago, something had felt off. The work was powerful, yes. Raw emotion captured in bold brushstrokes and unconventional color combinations. But there was a familiarity to it that nagged at me like a melody I couldn't quite place. "Where did you find her?" I'd asked Daniel over dinner that night, genuinely curious about this new artist he was so excited about. "Community art class in Queens," he'd said, not quite meeting my eyes. "She's worked as a waitress for years, painting in her spare time. Never had the confidence to show her work until now. Classic undiscovered talent." It was a good story. The kind that art collectors eat up with their overpriced wine. The undiscovered genius, the humble beginnings, the authentic voice emerging from obscurity. It was also, as I would discover, completely fabricated. The real story began to emerge when I spotted a similar style in an obscure online gallery featuring Vietnamese artists. Not identical, but close enough to raise questions. Questions led to investigations, investigations to discoveries, and discoveries to the devastating realization that my husband had orchestrated an elaborate fraud. Not just art forgery, but a complete fabrication of an artist's identity and body of work. Cassandra wasn't some untrained prodigy. She was a calculating opportunist with a minor in art history and a major in taking shortcuts. She couldn't paint the works attributed to her. Those were created by a talented forger Daniel had found, through his less reputable contacts in the art world. Her role was to be the face, the story, the authentic voice that collectors would pay premium prices to own. And Daniel? He was the mastermind, the manager, the lover who saw in Cassandra not just a bed partner, but a pathway to independence from the gallery, and the wife that had made his career possible. I discovered their affair almost by accident, dropping by the downtown studio unannounced with lunch one day. The studio was empty of artwork. Everything had been moved out the day before for a private showing, but not empty of evidence. Cassandra's lipstick on a wine glass. Daniel's watch on the bedside table of the small apartment attached to the workspace. A sketchbook filled not with preliminary drawings, but with notes about their plans, how they would gradually establish Cassandra's reputation, how they would leverage my gallery's credibility, how they would eventually break away to start their own venture once she was established. I left without letting them know I'd been there. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The uneaten lunch abandoned on the studio workbench. That night, when Daniel came home late smelling of her perfume, I greeted him with a smile and questions about the private showing. He lied smoothly, mentioning wealthy collectors and significant interest. I smiled and nodded, already formulating my response. Not a confrontation, but a reckoning. Not an emotional outburst, but a meticulously planned unveiling of their deception, timed for maximum impact. It took me 3 months to gather everything I needed. The connections between Cassandra's supposed original works and the Vietnamese artist she was copying, the evidence of the forger Daniel had hired, the paper trail of money and deception. I worked silently, maintained my routine, gave them no reason to suspect I knew anything, all while planning the most important curation of my career, the Gallery of Betrayal. The morning after the explosive gallery opening, I sat in my sunlit kitchen sipping coffee and watching the story unfold across the art world. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since dawn. Calls from major newspapers, art publications, fellow gallery owners, artists in our stable concerned about the implications for their own work. Forgery scandal rocks. Chelsea gallery scene. Red. The Art Forum headline. Visionary owner exposes husband's art fraud scheme, declared the Times. Art world power couple implodes amid accusations of fraud and infidelity, announced New York Magazine. I set down my phone and gazed out at the Manhattan skyline from our, now my, Tribeca penthouse. Daniel hadn't come home last night. According to my sources, he was holed up in a midtown hotel, fielding frantic calls from lawyers and the collectors who had already purchased Cassandra's fraudulent works. Cassandra herself had apparently fled to her actual apartment, not the manufactured downtown artist's loft featured in her promotional materials, but a surprisingly conventional Upper East Side doorman building financed by her very conventional investment banker father. The proletarian backstory, like everything else about her artistic persona, had been carefully constructed fiction. My lawyer, Catherine Wu, arrived precisely at 9, armed with a stack of documents and her characteristic efficiency. The FBI art crime team wants to meet this afternoon, she said, accepting the coffee I offered. They're very interested in the evidence you've compiled. This could lead to serious federal charges for both of them. And the gallery? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Your reputation is intact, enhanced even. You're being portrayed as the whistleblower who exposed corruption in your own house. The art world loves a scandal as long as you're on the right side of it. She smiled slightly. The fact that you're also the wronged wife adds a certain dramatic flair that the media can't resist. I nodded, unsurprised. I'd calculated that aspect of the exposure carefully. In the art world, narrative was everything. I had ensured that mine was clear, the principled gallery owner who valued artistic integrity above even her own marriage. Daniel's lawyer called, Catherine continued, her expression turning serious. He's proposing a settlement, his share of the gallery in exchange for you dropping the evidence that could lead to criminal charges. I laughed softly. He still doesn't understand what this is about, does he? I don't want his share of what we built together. I want the truth exposed. I took a sip of my coffee. Tell him I'll see him in court, both civil and criminal. Catherine nodded, making notes. The first collectors are already filing lawsuits against him personally, as well as his management company. The gallery itself is insulated, as you've never officially represented Cassandra or authenticated her work. Another happy accident, I murmured, though it had been no accident at all. I had deliberately kept Visionary Gallery from formally representing Cassandra, citing a desire to avoid the appearance of nepotism. Daniel had been frustrated, but couldn't argue without revealing his true motivations. The Vietnam connection is what everyone's most interested in, Catherine said. How did you find Nguyen Thi Minh? I thought back to the moment of discovery, the late-night internet search that had led me to a small gallery website in Hanoi, the striking similarities in composition and technique, the pit that had formed in my stomach as I realized what I was looking at. Research and instinct, I replied. Simply, when something feels wrong in art, it usually is. The question is just finding out why. My phone rang. Marcel Chen from Art Forum again. I let it go to voicemail. There would be time for interviews later, once the legal process was underway. What about the opening itself? Catherine asked, curiosity evident in her voice. The evidence wall, the public exposure. That was a risk. He could claim defamation, public humiliation. Let him, I replied, rising to refill our coffee cups. Every piece of evidence I displayed was verified and documented. The truth is an absolute defense against defamation. As for public humiliation, I shrugged. Perhaps he should have thought of that before, planning to humiliate me professionally by using my gallery to promote fraudulent work. Catherine studied me for a moment. This was never just about the affair, was it? The affair was. I paused, searching for the right words. A personal betrayal. Painful, yes, but private. What Daniel and Cassandra did with the art fraud was a professional betrayal. Of me, of our artists, of every collector who trusted our gallery's judgment. That I couldn't forgive or keep private. My phone buzzed with a text from Elise, my gallery director. The Times critic just called the Nguyen Thi Minh pieces we've acquired the most important discovery of genuine talent this season. Ironic timing. Also, waiting list for her work is already 20 collectors deep. I smiled slightly. Another calculated move. While gathering evidence of the fraud, I had reached out to Nguyen Thi Minh directly, offering to legitimately represent her work in the United States. The authentic pieces had arrived last week, just in time to be unveiled alongside the evidence of how Cassandra and Daniel had exploited her vision. There's something else, Catherine said, pulling another document from her briefcase. The storage unit in Brooklyn. The police found 40 more forgeries there, ready to be discovered as Cassandra's new works over the next 2 years. The forgery operation was larger than anyone realized. I nodded, unsurprised. Daniel was always thorough in his planning. It's what made him a good gallery partner. I took the document, scanning the inventory of forgeries. And a formidable opponent. He's facing serious prison time, Catherine warned. Once the FBI finishes their investigation— I know, I interrupted softly. I didn't make this decision lightly, Catherine. She studied me for a moment. No, I don't imagine. You did. The FBI art crime team's offices were clinically bright and surprisingly mundane, more cubicles and computer terminals than the dramatic investigation rooms portrayed in films. Special Agent Marquez, a woman with keen eyes and a precise manner, led me through the evidence I'd provided, asking occasional clarifying questions but mostly listening as I explained how I'd unraveled the scheme. So the initial suspicion came from stylistic similarities to Nguyen's work? She confirmed, making notes in a slim leather portfolio. Yes. Though at first I couldn't place why Cassandra's paintings felt familiar. It was only after extensive research that I connected them to Nguyen's exhibitions in Vietnam. And your husband never suspected you were investigating? I smiled slightly. Daniel was too consumed with the success of their plan to notice its unraveling. The pieces were selling, that's all that mattered to him. At significantly inflated prices, Agent Marquez noted, referencing a document. The last Cassandra Veil painting sold for $120,000. Based on our preliminary assessment, the actual value of a forgery of this quality would be less than $5,000. The art market runs on narrative and provenance, I explained. They weren't just selling paintings. They were selling the story of an undiscovered prodigy with raw, authentic talent. The visionary gallery connection lent credibility that allowed them to command those prices. Your credibility, she said. Pointedly. Yes, my credibility. Built over 15 years of genuine authentication and curation. Agent Marquez nodded, closing her portfolio. We'll need you to testify when this goes to trial, both against your husband and Ms. Veil. I understand. This kind of testimony can be difficult against family members. Are you prepared for that? I met her gaze steadily. Agent Marquez, when I discovered what they were doing, I had two choices: protect my husband and become complicit in fraud, or protect my professional integrity and the trust collector's place in my gallery. It wasn't really a choice at all. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. We'll be in touch as the case progresses. In the meantime, try to avoid discussing specifics with the press. As I left the federal building, my phone buzzed with another text from Elise. Daniel just showed up at the gallery demanding access to his office. Security turned him away per your instructions. He's threatening legal action. I typed back quickly. Call Frank. My lawyer would handle it. Daniel no longer had any legal right to enter the gallery premises. Not since I'd dissolved our business partnership in paperwork filed carefully at 9:01 a.m. the morning after the opening. A text from an unknown number appeared. You've made a serious mistake. We need to talk. C. Cassandra. I deleted the message without responding. There was nothing to discuss. Every statement I'd made was backed by evidence, every accusation supported by documentation. Their threats were as empty as their artistic integrity. By the time I reached the gallery, a small group of photographers had gathered outside. News traveled fast in the art world, and a scandal of this magnitude was irresistible. I straightened my shoulders and approached the entrance, ignoring the shouted questions and camera clicks. Inside, the gallery was surprisingly busy for a Tuesday afternoon. Collectors and curators moved through the space, some genuinely interested in the art, others clearly there to witness the aftermath of scandal firsthand. The evidence wall from the opening had been replaced with Nguyen Thi Minh's authentic works, vibrant, emotional pieces that shared some stylistic elements with the forgeries but possessed a depth and originality the copies could never capture. Elise met me at my office door, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she'd had even less sleep than I had. The police collected the last of the documentation an hour ago, she reported, and we've had 17 interview requests since morning, including a primetime segment with Channel 4. Decline them all for now, I instructed, setting down my bag. We focus on the gallery and the artists who've been with us loyally. This isn't about media attention. Except it is, Elise countered gently. Right now, you're positioned as the champion of artistic integrity. That narrative could change quickly if Daniel gets his version out first. I considered this, recognizing the wisdom in her concern. The art world loved to build people up only to tear them down again. Today, I was the principled gallery owner exposing fraud. Tomorrow, I could be portrayed as the vindictive wife using her position to destroy her husband's career. Set up the Channel 4 interview, I conceded. But only that one, and only to discuss the importance of authenticity in art. This isn't about my marriage. Elise nodded, clearly relieved. There's something else. 3 of Cassandra's collectors are in the main gallery. They want to discuss authentication and restitution. I sighed. This would be the first of many such conversations. Wealthy, powerful, people who'd been duped into buying forgeries, now facing both financial loss and public embarrassment. Give me 5 minutes, then send them in. After Elise left, I moved to the window overlooking the gallery floor below. Visitors moved through the space, pausing before paintings and sculptures, engaging in quiet conversation. From this distance, it looked like any normal day at Visionary, the business of art appreciation continuing despite the human drama that had unfolded within these walls. My phone buzzed with another message, this one from Daniel. You've made your point. Now let's discuss a reasonable resolution before both our reputations are completely destroyed. I almost laughed at his presumption that this was a negotiating tactic, that I was just making a point, that his reputation wasn't already in shambles. Even now, he didn't understand the fundamental difference between us. I valued truth above comfort, integrity above relationship. It was why I'd succeeded in the art world where so many failed. I deleted his message just as Elise returned with the collectors, a hedge fund manager and his wife who'd purchased 2 Cassandra Vale paintings for their Southampton home, and a young tech entrepreneur who'd acquired one for his corporate headquarters as an investment. Mrs. Kincaid, the hedge fund manager began, his tone carefully modulated between respect and demand. I believe we find ourselves in an unusual situation. Indeed, I agreed, gesturing for them to sit, though not one of my creation. We purchased these works through your gallery, his wife interjected, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she gestured emphatically. No, I corrected gently. You purchased them through Daniel Kincaid Art Management, which operated independently from Visionary Gallery, as I'm sure your lawyers have already confirmed from the sales documentation. The tech entrepreneur leaned forward. Regardless of the technical arrangement, these purchases were made based on the reputation of Visionary Gallery. Your reputation. I understand your frustration, I said, maintaining a calm, professional tone. And while I'm not legally responsible for these sales, I am prepared to offer authentication services for any works you've acquired through my husband's management company. For pieces confirmed as forgeries, I can also provide expert testimony for your insurance claims or legal proceedings. That's it? The hedge fund manager asked incredulously. No restitution? No exchange? I can't offer financial restitution for transactions I wasn't party to, I explained. However, I am offering my professional services to help you recover your investments through proper legal channels. They left unsatisfied but somewhat mollified by my offer of expert testimony, which they would need for both insurance claims and lawsuits against Daniel. As Elise showed them out, my phone rang again. Daniel. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. Eliza. His voice was strained, lacking its usual confident tone. This has gone far enough. I disagree, I replied coolly. From the FBI's perspective, it's just beginning. Do you really want to see me in prison? A note of disbelief colored his words. After 15 years of marriage? What I wanted was a husband who respected me enough not to use my professional reputation to legitimize fraud. What I wanted was a business partner who understood that art is about truth, not deception. This wasn't about disrespecting you, he insisted. It was about creating something independent, something of my own. Something built on lies, I countered. Something that used my gallery's reputation as collateral without my knowledge or consent. The paintings sold, he argued. Collectors were happy. No one was getting hurt. Except the actual artist whose work was being stolen. Except the collectors who thought they were buying authentic art. Except me. I paused, controlling the emotion threatening to enter my voice. You weren't creating anything, Daniel. You were stealing. From Nguyen, from our collectors, from me. I'll sign over everything, he offered, desperation now evident. My share of the gallery, the apartment, all of it. Just tell the FBI you want to drop the charges. That's not how federal investigations work. They don't need my permission to prosecute art fraud. Eliza, please. His voice broke slightly. You know what the art world is like. If I go to prison for fraud, I'll never work in this industry again. You should have considered that. Possibility before you started forging paintings, I replied simply. Goodbye, Daniel. I ended the call and set down the phone, a strange calm settling over me. For months, I'd carried the weight of his betrayal, both personal and professional, waiting for the right moment to act. Now that it was done, now that the truth was exposed and the consequences were unfolding, I felt lighter somehow, unburdened. My intercom buzzed. Ms. Kincaid? There's a James Chen from Vogue here to see you. He says he's writing a feature on authenticity in the art market. I smiled slightly. The narrative was already shifting from scandal to substance, from the sensational details of a marriage's collapse to the more significant questions of artistic integrity and market transparency. Send him in, I instructed. I have quite a lot to say about authenticity. The Channel 4 interview took place in the gallery after closing hours, the camera crew carefully positioning lights to showcase both me and the authentic Nguyen Thi Minh paintings behind me. The interviewer, Sophia Gardner, was known for her incisive style and art world knowledge, exactly the person I wanted to help shape this narrative. Eliza Kincaid, thank you for speaking with us during what must be an extraordinarily difficult time, she began, her expression professionally sympathetic. Thank you for focusing on the substantive issues at stake, I replied. This isn't just about a personal betrayal, but about integrity in the art market. Let's start with the discovery. When did you first suspect that Cassandra Vale's work might not be authentic? I considered my answer carefully. Art authentication is both science and instinct. Something about the work felt derivative, though I couldn't immediately place why. It was only after extensive research that I connected her style to Nguyen Thi Minh, an established Vietnamese artist whose work had never been widely exhibited in the United States. And your husband, Daniel Kincaid, was directly involved in this fraudulent scheme? The evidence suggests he was instrumental in orchestrating it, yes. The forged paintings, the fabricated backstory, the strategic marketing of Cassandra Vale, as an undiscovered prodigy, all of this appears to have been carefully planned. Some might question your motives in exposing this so publicly, Sophia noted. Critics have suggested this could be seen as retaliation for the affair between your husband and Ms. Vale. I met her gaze steadily. I discovered the art fraud before I knew about the affair. The personal betrayal was painful, certainly, but it was the professional fraud, the willingness to undermine everything I've built and stood for in the art world, that I couldn't allow to continue. You've been criticized for the theatrical nature of the exposure, revealing the evidence at your gallery opening with both your husband and Ms. Vale present. Why choose such a public forum? Art fraud isn't just a crime against individual collectors. It's a crime against artistic integrity itself. These forgeries weren't just stealing from buyers. They were stealing another artist's voice, vision, and opportunity. That kind of deception deserved to be publicly acknowledged and condemned. The interview continued for nearly an hour, covering the technical aspects of the forgeries, the market implications for collectors, and my decision to represent Nguyen Thi Minh's authentic work going forward. Throughout, I maintained the calm, measured tone I'd cultivated over years of navigating the often dramatic art world. As the crew packed up their equipment, Sophia approached me off camera. "That was remarkably composed," she observed. "Most people would be falling apart under these circumstances." I offered a small smile. "The art world trains you for upheaval. Success today, obscurity tomorrow. You learn to separate personal emotion from professional obligation." "And are you separating them?" I considered the question. "I'm allowing myself to feel the personal betrayal privately. But professionally, my responsibility is clear. To the artists we represent, to our collectors, to the integrity of the gallery I've built." She studied me for a moment. "Well, for what it's worth, the art world seems to be solidly on your side. Daniel and Cassandra's reputations are in tatters." As if summoned by her words, my phone lit up with a news alert. "Collector files 3 million, lawsuit against Daniel Kincaid and Cassandra Vale for art fraud." The first of many, I suspected. After the crew departed, I walked slowly through the darkened gallery, the spotlights illuminating only the artwork, Nguyen's vibrant canvases alongside the other artists we represented legitimately. In the quiet aftermath of the interview, the emotional reality I'd been holding at bay began to seep through my professional composure. 15 years of marriage, 15 years of building a life and a business together, all of it undermined by greed and deception. I paused before one of Nguyen's most powerful pieces, a swirling composition of color and movement that captured both hope and despair in the same brushstrokes. This was authentic art, born from genuine creative vision, not manufactured for market appeal. This was what I had dedicated my life to sharing with the world. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Judge denied Daniel's request to access gallery accounts. Assets remain frozen pending investigation." Another piece of the unraveling. Daniel would be facing not just criminal charges but financial ruin. The collector's lawsuits alone would bankrupt him, even if he somehow avoided prison time. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sorrow, pleased that justice was being served, but mourning what had been lost along the way. Another text appeared, this one from a number I didn't recognize. "It wasn't supposed to end like this. I never meant to hurt you. D." A new phone number. He must have guessed I'd blocked his old one. For a moment I considered responding, asking him when the deception had begun, whether any part of our relationship had been genuine, how he had justified using my reputation to legitimize fraud. Instead, I blocked this number too. The time. For those conversations had passed the moment he decided that my professional integrity was an acceptable casualty of his ambition. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. More collectors seeking restitution, more press inquiries, the continuing FBI investigation. But tonight, in the quiet gallery surrounded by authentic art, I allowed myself to acknowledge what had been destroyed, and what remained. My marriage was over. My professional reputation was not just intact, but enhanced. The gallery would continue, stronger for having demonstrated its commitment to artistic integrity even at personal cost. As I finally left the gallery, locking the door behind me, a light rain had begun to fall, softening the harsh edges of the city. I stood for a moment on the sidewalk, looking back at the illuminated visionary sign above the entrance. Vision. The ability to see clearly what others miss. It had made me successful in art authentication and ultimately saved me from being another casualty of Daniel's deception. I hailed a taxi and gave the driver my address, watching the gallery recede through the rain-streaked window. Tomorrow would be soon enough to continue building from the ashes of betrayal. Tonight, I would allow myself to mourn what had been lost, and to recognize that in exposing the truth, I had remained true to myself. 6 months later, I stood in the expanded visionary gallery space, overseeing the final preparations for our most ambitious exhibition yet, Authentic Voices, A Global Perspective. The show featured works from artists across 5 continents, including 6 powerful new pieces from Nguyen Thi Minh, who had flown in from Hanoi for the opening. The gallery had not just survived the scandal, it had thrived. Our commitment to authenticity had resonated in an art world increasingly concerned about provenance and legitimacy. New collectors had sought us out specifically because of our stance against fraud, and existing clients had deepened their relationships with the gallery. "The lighting on the southeast wall needs adjustment," I instructed one of the technicians. "Nguyen's work requires more warmth to bring out the undertones." As he moved to make the correction, Elise approached with her tablet in hand. "Final. Confirmation from the Times critic. She'll be attending tonight. Also, the Museum of Modern Art curator wants to discuss acquiring 2 pieces for their permanent collection." I nodded, pleased but not surprised. Nguyen's work had captivated the American art scene since its authentic introduction. Her unique perspective, blending traditional Vietnamese influences with contemporary expressionism, offered something genuinely new in a market often saturated with derivative works. "Has Nguyen's flight arrived?" I asked, checking my watch. "Her car just left JFK. She should be at the hotel within the hour." My phone buzzed with a news alert, something I'd become accustomed to over the past months as the legal proceedings against Daniel and Cassandra had unfolded in both criminal and civil courts. Art fraud case results in guilty plea. Daniel Kincaid faces up to 20 years. I set down the phone, a complex mixture of emotions washing over me. Finally, after months of legal maneuvering and delays, Daniel had accepted the inevitable. According to the article, he had agreed to plead guilty to multiple counts of art fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy in exchange for his testimony against the network of forgers and corrupt dealers who had supplied the fake Cassandra veil paintings. "Eliza?" Elise's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "Are you all right?" "Yes," I replied, straightening my shoulders. "Just processing. The exhibition takes precedence tonight." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "I'll make sure everything's perfect." As she walked away, I moved through the gallery space, making small adjustments to placement and lighting. The work was a welcome distraction from the news. Tonight wasn't about Daniel or the fraud or the collapse of my marriage. It was about celebrating authentic artistic vision, exactly what Visionary Gallery had always stood for. By the time Nguyen Thi Minh arrived at the gallery for the pre-opening walkthrough, I had compartmentalized the morning's news into a distant corner of my mind. The Vietnamese artist was a small woman with penetrating eyes and a quiet confidence that belied her international stature. "Ms. Kincaid," she greeted me in careful English, extending her hand. "It is an honor to finally meet in person." "The honor is mine," I replied sincerely. "Your work deserves this recognition, and much more." As we walked through the exhibition, discussing placement and lighting, I was struck by the irony of our situation. Had Daniel and Cassandra never attempted their fraud, I might never have discovered Nguyen's work. Their deception had inadvertently led to authentic recognition for the very artist they had exploited. "You have created something very special here," Nguyen observed as we completed the tour. "Not just an exhibition, but a statement about truth in art." That was the intention, I acknowledged. After everything that happened, it seemed important to reaffirm what Visionary stands for. She paused before one of her largest canvases, a swirling composition that seemed to capture both joy and sorrow in the same brushstrokes. "In Vietnam, we have a saying, 'Truth has a certain smell that cannot be disguised.' You smelled the truth even when others tried to hide it." I smiled at the apt metaphor. My professional reputation was built on authentication, determining what's genuine and what's forgery. I suppose it was inevitable that I would apply those same standards to my personal life eventually. And this Daniel, your husband who helped steal my work, he faces prison now? Yes, he accepted a plea deal this morning, up to 20 years, though he'll likely serve less in exchange for his cooperation. Nguyen nodded, seeming satisfied. Not for my sake, I have found greater recognition through this strange path, but for the principle. Art must come from truth, not deception. Later that evening, as the gallery filled with collectors, critics, and art world luminaries, I found myself the center of more attention than usual. The news of Daniel's guilty plea had spread quickly, and while most guests were tactful enough not to mention it directly, I could sense their curiosity in sidelong glances and carefully phrased questions about the gallery's recent challenges. Marcel Chen from Art Forum cornered me near Nguyen's centerpiece. "The timing seems almost orchestrated," he observed. "Daniel pleads guilty the morning of your triumphant exhibition opening. One might think you planned it that way." I raised an eyebrow. "I assure you, Marcel, I have no influence over the federal prosecutor's schedule." "Of course not," he backtracked smoothly. "But you must admit, it creates a powerful narrative. Arc. The fraudster confesses as the authentic artist is celebrated." "If there's a narrative here, it's one about consequences," I replied. "Actions have them. Daniels are catching up to him, while Visionary continues to focus on what we've always valued: authentic artistic expression." The exhibition was a resounding success. By midnight, most of Nguyen's pieces had sold to prominent collectors, and the critical response was overwhelmingly positive. As the last guests departed, I found myself alone with Elise and a glass of champagne, surveying the gallery. "Two authentic voices," Elise proposed, raising her glass. "And two unexpected new beginnings," I added, thinking of how different my life looked now from a year ago. The dissolution of my marriage had been painful, but from that ending had come unexpected opportunities, not just professionally with Nguyen's work, but personally as well. I had rediscovered parts of myself that had been subsumed in my marriage to Daniel: my passion for traveling to discover new artists, my willingness to take risks on unconventional work, my desire to use the gallery as a platform for voices that might otherwise go unheard. Without the constraints of Daniel's more commercial sensibilities, Visionary had evolved into something closer to my original vision. The Times critic called it a defining exhibition for post-scandal Visionary, Elise noted, checking her phone. "He specifically mentions how you've transformed personal betrayal into a powerful curatorial statement about authenticity." I smiled slightly. "Not quite what I intended, but I'll take it." "Are you going to visit him?" Elise asked after a moment, the question hanging between us. We both knew who him was. "No," I replied simply. "There's nothing left to say that hasn't been said through lawyers and court documents." "Closure doesn't always come from conversation," she agreed. "Sometimes it comes from just moving forward." And I had moved forward. The gallery was thriving. The expanded Chelsea space was already proving too small for our ambitions, and we were considering a second location in the emerging Hudson Yards area. I had recently closed on a new apartment in Tribeca, smaller than the penthouse I'd shared with Daniel, but more reflective of my personal aesthetic. As Elise left for the night, I made one final circuit of the gallery, pausing before each of Nguyen's paintings. In the hushed, dimly lit space, their vibrancy seemed even more pronounced, genuine emotion captured in pigment and canvas, authentic creative vision made tangible. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Sentencing hearing set for January 15th. Prosecution recommending 12 years based on cooperation. Call me tomorrow to discuss impact statement." January 15th, almost exactly 1 year from the night I'd discovered Daniel and Cassandra's betrayal. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. Would I deliver an impact statement at his sentencing? The thought had crossed my mind several times during the legal proceedings. What would I say to the court, and to Daniel, about the impact of his actions? How would I articulate the personal and professional damage he had caused? As I locked the gallery and stepped out into the cool night air, I realized I didn't need a courtroom to define my narrative. I had already written it, in the way I'd handled the exposure, in my refusal to be defined by betrayal, in the successful exhibition that had just concluded. My story wasn't about Daniel's deception anymore. It was about my own vision, for the gallery, for authentic art, for a life rebuilt on my terms. 1 year later, I stood on the balcony of my Milan hotel, watching the early morning light illuminate the city's ancient architecture. The art fair that had brought me to Italy was proving to be even more successful than anticipated. I'd discovered 3 promising new artists and sold several major pieces from Visionary's established portfolio. My phone chimed with an email from Elise. Nguyen's MoMA installation opens next week. Advance press is extraordinary. Also, the Hudson Yards space lease is ready for your signature when you return. I smiled, composing a quick reply. The past year had been one of remarkable growth for the gallery. After the initial scandal faded, what remained was Visionary's enhanced reputation for integrity and authenticity. Collectors trusted us implicitly, a rare commodity in an art world often clouded by questions of provenance and legitimacy. Another email arrived, this one from Catherine. Cassandra Vale's probation hearing scheduled for next month. She's requesting permission to work in arts. Education. Prosecutors are asking for your position. I considered this unexpected development. Cassandra had received a much lighter sentence than Daniel. Just 18 months, most of it suspended in favor of probation and community service. Unlike Daniel, she had no prior involvement in art, fraud, and had cooperated fully once caught, providing evidence that she had been, at least initially, manipulated by Daniel's more sophisticated understanding of the art market. The last time I'd seen her was across a courtroom during Daniel's sentencing hearing. She had looked diminished somehow. The confident artist persona stripped away to reveal a young woman who had made terrible choices in pursuit of shortcuts to success. After a moment's reflection, I typed, "No objection to arts education work, provided it doesn't involve authentication or valuation. Everyone deserves a second chance to contribute positively." I set down the phone and returned my attention to the Milan skyline. Daniel was now in his second year of a 12-year sentence at a federal prison in Pennsylvania. I had not visited, had not corresponded, had not engaged in any way beyond the minimum required for finalizing our divorce and the dissolution of our business interests. Sometimes, when a major success occurred at the gallery, or when I discovered a particularly exciting new artist, I would momentarily think of sharing the news with him, a reflexive impulse born of 15 years of partnership. But those moments grew increasingly rare as new patterns and relationships formed in my life. I had dated occasionally, though nothing serious had developed. My focus remained on the gallery's expansion and on my renewed passion for discovering authentic artistic voices around the world. This trip to Milan was part of an extended European tour. After Italy would come Berlin, Prague, and finally Istanbul, where a promising young Turkish painter had caught my attention through his provocative online portfolio. A knock at the hotel room door interrupted my reflections. A courier delivered a package, a catalog from a small gallery in Hanoi, accompanied by a handwritten note from Nguyen. For the woman who saw truth when others saw only opportunity. With gratitude, Min. Inside the catalog was a feature on Nguyen's rising international profile, with prominent mention of Visionary Gallery's role in introducing her authentic work to American audiences after the notorious fraud case. There was a small photo of me alongside one of Nguyen at her MoMA opening. The contrast between this quiet morning in Milan and the tumultuous gallery opening 2 years ago could not have been more pronounced. Then, I had used public exposure to shatter the facade of my marriage and Daniel's fraudulent scheme in one calculated move. Now, I was building something new, expanding Visionary's global reach, establishing relationships with authentic artists worldwide, creating a legacy of integrity in a market often lacking it. My phone rang. Marcel Chen again. Despite his occasional tendency toward sensationalism, the art forum critic had become something of an ally in the aftermath of the scandal. "Eliza, how's Milan treating you?" he asked without preamble when I answered, "Beautifully. The light here makes even mediocre art look transcendent." He laughed. "Found anything worth bringing back to New York?" "A few promising possibilities. You'll have to wait for the fall exhibition to see." "Actually, that's why I'm calling. I'm working on a feature about galleries that have successfully reinvented themselves after major setbacks. Visionary is, obviously, the prime example." I hesitated. While the gallery had moved beyond the scandal, I remained cautious about revisiting it in the press. "What's your angle, Marcel?" "Redemption through authenticity. How your insistence on artistic integrity not only saved Visionary but propelled it to new heights." He paused. "It's a positive piece, Eliza, about resilience and reinvention, not scandal." I considered his proposal. Perhaps it was time to reshape the narrative completely, to acknowledge the past without allowing it to define the gallery's future. "Send me the outline," I agreed finally. "But I want final approval on any quotes attributed to me." "Done," he said quickly, clearly pleased. "One more thing. Did you hear about Daniel's appeal being denied?" I hadn't. The legal proceedings had receded from my daily awareness as the gallery's new initiatives took precedence. No, I hadn't heard. It was announced yesterday. His legal team tried to argue that the valuation of the forgeries was inflated, which would have reduced his sentence. The circuit court wasn't having it. "I see," I replied neutrally. "Is that relevant to your article?" "Just context," Marcel assured me. "The focus is on Visionary's transformation. Speaking of which, the Hudson Yards expansion is genius. The art world is buzzing about it." After finishing the call, I returned to the balcony, reflecting on the strange symmetry of life. 2 years ago, Daniel had been positioned as one of New York's most influential gallery owners, with me as his partner in both business and life. Now our roles were dramatically reversed. He confined to a prison cell while I expanded the gallery internationally. There was no satisfaction in the comparison, only a certain melancholy recognition of how quickly fortunes could change when built on deception rather than authentic value. That evening, as I walked through the Milan Art Fair's closing reception, I found myself drawn to a small installation in a quiet corner of the massive exhibition hall. The piece consisted of multiple mirrors arranged to reflect fragments of the viewer from different angles, creating a disorienting effect where one could never see one's complete reflection. "Fragmented Truth," read the accompanying placard. "An exploration of how we see ourselves versus how others perceive us." I stood before it, watching as the mirrors captured parts of me. A hand here, a shoulder there, an eye, the curve of my neck, never allowing a complete image to form. It struck me as an apt metaphor for the aftermath of betrayal. Daniel had seen me as someone whose professional reputation could be leveraged for his schemes. Cassandra had seen me as an obstacle to be removed from Daniel's life. The art world had initially seen me as the wronged wife seeking revenge. None had seen me completely. My commitment to artistic integrity, my willingness to sacrifice personal comfort for professional principles, my capacity to rebuild and reinvent after devastation. But perhaps that incompleteness of vision wasn't unique to my situation. How often do we truly see each other fully? How often do we recognize the complexity in those closest to us? Daniel had been my husband for 15 years, yet I had missed the signs of his growing dissatisfaction with our partnership, his willingness to compromise ethical standards for profit, his capacity for elaborate deception. As I left the installation, my phone buzzed with another email notification, a message from a name I didn't immediately recognize. Ms. Kincaid, my name is Thomas Mercer. I was Daniel's cellmate during his first 6 months at Petersburg. He asked me to contact you upon my release. I understand if you want nothing to do with this communication, but he wanted me to tell you that your gallery opening that night accomplished exactly what you intended. He finally understands what you meant about authenticity being non-negotiable. He doesn't expect forgiveness, just wanted you to know that the lesson, however painfully delivered, was received. I stared at the message for a long moment, unexpected emotion rising in my throat. After all this time, all the legal proceedings, all the public exposure and professional consequences, this simple acknowledgement felt strangely significant. Not because I needed Daniel's validation or approval. I had long since moved beyond seeking either. But because it suggested that something authentic had emerged from the elaborate deception that had ended our marriage, a genuine recognition of the values I had always held sacred. I saved the email without responding. Perhaps someday I would reply, but not now. For now, it was enough to know that the truth had finally been acknowledged, even if it had taken public humiliation and a prison sentence to achieve it. As I returned to my hotel, the Milan evening settling around me like a velvet cloak, I felt a sense of completion that had eluded me even after the legal proceedings concluded. The circle that had begun with betrayal at my gallery opening had closed with this simple acknowledgement of understanding. Tomorrow, I would fly to Berlin to meet with gallery owners interested in partnership opportunities. The day after, Prague awaited with its emerging contemporary art scene. Life continued to unfold in new and unexplored directions, no longer defined by what had been lost, but by what was being created. Daniel had brought his mistress to my gallery opening, thinking it would mark the end of one story. Instead, it had become the beginning of another, one in which authenticity triumphed over deception, and truth, however painfully revealed, ultimately prevailed. 5 years later, the Hudson Yards location of Visionary Gallery hummed with activity as final preparations for our anniversary exhibition reached completion. 5 years of vision, authentic voices in a digital age, would open tonight, showcasing the work of every artist we had introduced to the American market since the expansion. The lighting on the north wall needs adjustment, I instructed, watching, as the technicians made the correction. And let's move the Chen sculpture 2 feet to the left for better circulation flow. Elise, now my full partner in the gallery, nodded in agreement. Perfect. The Times photographer will be here at 4 to capture the installation before the opening. The past 5 years had transformed Visionary from a respected Chelsea gallery to an international presence in the art world. Beyond our 2 New York locations, we had established partnerships with galleries in Berlin, Istanbul, and most recently, Hanoi, where Nguyen Thi Minh had helped us create a residency program for emerging Southeast Asian artists. My phone buzzed with a message from our Berlin partner. Congratulations on 5 extraordinary years. Wish I could be there tonight. The Beckman paintings arrived safely. Exhibition preparations underway. I smiled, thinking of how naturally the expansion had unfolded once I embraced a truly global vision for the gallery. The betrayal that had seemed so devastating had ultimately freed me to pursue artistic connections I might never have explored, while navigating the compromises of my marriage to Daniel. Package for you, Elise said, handing me a small parcel that had arrived by courier. Looks like it's from Hanoi. Inside was a miniature painting no larger than my palm, one of Nguyen's distinctive landscapes, accompanied by a note. For the woman who taught me that sometimes exposure, however painful, leads to truth. With gratitude for 5 years of authentic vision. I placed the small painting on my desk, touched by the gesture. Nguyen had become not just our most successful artist, but a close friend and collaborator. The fraud that had initially connected us had evolved into a genuine creative partnership that had benefited us both immeasurably. "Have you seen the Times profile?" Elise asked, pulling up the article on her tablet. The headline read, "From Scandal to Standard Bearer, How Eliza." Kincaid's visionary gallery redefined authenticity in art. The article detailed our journey from the fraud exposure 5 years ago to our current position as one of the most trusted names in the international art market. There was a section about Daniel, now in the middle of his sentence, and his recent work teaching art history to fellow inmates. There was mention of Cassandra Vale, who had completed her probation and now worked with at-risk youth in a community arts program in Chicago under her real name. But these were footnotes to the main narrative, the story of how Visionary had pioneered new standards for provenance verification, artist representation, and global collaboration in an increasingly complex art market. "They didn't mention your engagement," Elise noted with a slight smile. "I asked them not to," I replied, twisting the sapphire ring on my finger. "Some things deserve privacy." My relationship with Robert, a restoration expert I'd met during a museum collaboration 3 years ago, had developed slowly and cautiously. Unlike Daniel, he had no interest in the business side of art. His passion was purely for preservation and authenticity, for maintaining the integrity of creative works across centuries. Our engagement was recent, quiet, and entirely separate from the public narrative of Visionary Gallery. We had both been shaped by previous betrayals and had found in each other a shared commitment to transparency and truth. The final preparations for the opening continued around me as I retreated to my office to review the evening's speaking points. The exhibition would feature work from over 30 artists across 5 continents, each one selected not for market potential, but for authentic creative vision. A notification appeared on my computer screen, a news alert mentioning Daniel. I hesitated before clicking it, my instinct to maintain separation from his continuing story momentarily at war with natural curiosity. Former gallery owner Daniel Kincaid granted early release for good behavior and cooperation. I scanned the article quickly. After serving 7 years of his 12-year sentence, Daniel was being released next month. His cooperation with ongoing investigations into art fraud networks had been cited as a factor in the early release decision, along with his exemplary conduct and educational contributions within the prison system. There was a quote from him, his first public statement in years. "I accept full responsibility for the fraud I perpetrated and the trust I betrayed, both personally and professionally. The art world deserves better, and I hope my case serves as a cautionary tale about the non-negotiable importance of authenticity." I closed the article, surprised by my lack of emotional response. 5 years ago, news of his early release might have triggered anger or anxiety. Now, it felt like information about a distant acquaintance, relevant to my past, but disconnected from my present reality. Daniel's release would undoubtedly generate renewed media interest in the scandal, but Visionary had long since established its post-Daniel identity. Whatever he chose to do upon release, whether return to the art world in some capacity or pursue a completely different path, would have no bearing on the gallery's trajectory. "Eliza?" Elise appeared in the doorway. "The caterers need final approval on the placement for the reception." I followed her back into the main gallery space where the exhibition had taken its final form, a carefully curated journey through diverse artistic perspectives united by their authentic vision. Each piece represented a genuine creative voice. Each artist had been selected based on the integrity of their work, rather than market trends or commercial potential. This was what I had always wanted Visionary to be, before Daniel's commercial. Sensibilities had pulled us towards safer, more marketable choices. The betrayal that had seemed so devastating had ultimately freed me to pursue the pure curatorial vision I'd started with. "It's perfect," I told Elise, surveying the completed installation. Exactly what I envisioned. As the opening reception began that evening, I found myself surrounded by artists, collectors, and critics who had witnessed Visionary's transformation over the past 5 years. The gallery hummed with conversation and appreciation as guests moved from piece to piece, engaging with the diverse artistic expressions on display. Marcel Chen approached, champagne in hand. Extraordinary exhibition, Eliza. You've truly redefined what a contemporary gallery can be. Thank you, Marcel. That's high praise coming from Art Forum's most discerning critic. He smiled. I saw the news about Daniel. Any comment? Only that I wish him well, I replied honestly. The past is past. Remarkably gracious, considering everything. He studied me for a moment. You never published that impact statement at his sentencing. I always wondered what you would have said. I considered his implicit question. What would I have said? To Daniel, given the opportunity to articulate the impact of his betrayal. What words could have possibly captured the complex reality of deception, exposure, and ultimately, reinvention? I didn't need to make a statement, I told Marcel. The gallery's success speaks for itself. Later that night, as the last guests departed and the exhibition stood in silent completion, I took a final walk through the space. Each piece represented a connection forged in the aftermath of betrayal, artists I might never have discovered, had I remained in the comfortable but constraining partnership with Daniel. My phone buzzed with a message from Robert. Exhibition looks stunning in the Times photos. Can't wait to see it in person tomorrow. Proud of you. I smiled, typing back a quick reply before slipping the phone into my pocket. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new authentic voices to discover and share. The story that had begun with such painful exposure at a gallery opening 5 years ago had evolved into something I could never have anticipated. A narrative, not of victimhood but of vision, not of betrayal but of authenticity reclaimed and amplified. Daniel had brought his mistress to my gallery opening, thinking it would end one story. Instead, it had become the catalyst for another, one in which truth, however painfully revealed, had ultimately set me free to create something more authentic than I had ever imagined possible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.